In the heat of June 1314, on a misty morning near a small, twisting stream known as the Bannockburn, the air was thick with anticipation and unease. Two armies faced each other across the rolling fields, an inconceivable mismatch in numbers, yet a clash destined to echo through history. On one side stood barely 6,000 Scots, their faces weathered by years of hardship and battle, their eyes burning with a fierce hunger not merely for victory, but for freedom itself. On the other side, over 20,000 English knights and soldiers clad in gleaming plate armor, mounted on powerful war horses, their banners snapping boldly in the chilly morning breeze. Can you imagine the silence broken by the restless sounds of horses stomping the ground, clinking armor, and murmurs of anticipation mingling with the distant call of birds? The Scots weren't just facing men, they were facing the might of a kingdom, an empire that believed sheer force would crush them like insects beneath a boot. The tension around that narrow battlefield snapped like a drawn bowstring, ready to unleash chaos. Every heartbeat counted, every breath filled with the knowledge that the next hours might seal the fate of Scotland forever. Would these few thousand men stand firm against an army many times their size? Or would Scotland's dream of independence be trampled under the weight of England's steel? You might ask yourself, how on earth could a smaller, seemingly outmatched force hope to defy one of the most powerful armies in medieval Europe? What secret advantage did Robert the Bruce, the King of Scots that day, hold in his hand to shatter the mighty English host and carve a victory that still resonates 7 centuries later? Let's step closer. Imagine yourself walking through those fields, muddy, narrow, and treacherous. The Bannockburn itself wasn't just a simple stream. At certain points, it twisted through marshy patches of land, a natural hazard waiting to swallow feet and hooves alike. Horses, no matter how mighty, feared sinking into the bog. What seemed like just another battlefield was carefully chosen ground. It was a trap laid out with cold calculation, a weapon in its own right. The marching English knights, heavy in their armor designed for charging open fields, found the terrain working against them. Imagine their hooves sinking deep into the wet soil, horses tiring before they even reached the enemy lines. The once glittering suits of armor suddenly felt like a burden, dragging their owners down with every step. Meanwhile, the Scots, lighter and familiar with their homeland's quirks, moved with a silent confidence born of years of guile and survival. And then there was Robert the Bruce himself. Not some distant figurehead issuing commands from a sumptuous chamber, but a warrior king who led from the front. Picture him atop a small, sturdy horse, clad in armor but nimble, a battle axe ever ready in his hands, his eyes sharp and focused beneath his helmet. This was a man who'd fought through betrayal, exile, and near ruin to wear that crown, and now he stood among his men, not above them. If you've heard the famous tales of cavalry sweeping aside infantry, charging like living, battering rams to break lines and scatter foes, you might expect the Scots to crumble beneath the thunder of English hooves. But Bannockburn was about to rewrite the rules of medieval warfare. This small, determined army was about to show the world that raw power wasn't everything. Strategy, courage, and will count just as much. Now, allow me to take you back a little further in time, not to slow the pace, but so you understand the fire that forged this moment. The roots of this battlefield clash stretch decades into the past. Scotland was shaken by a royal crisis caused by tragedy. King Alexander III, the beloved ruler, fell from his horse in 1286, an accident that left Scotland without a clear heir. His granddaughter, Margaret, known as the Maid of Norway, was the last hope, but fate snatched her away too, dying before she could even claim her crown. What came next was chaos. Powerful Scottish nobles began vying fiercely for the throne, threatening to rip the kingdom apart from within. In the midst of this turmoil, England's King Edward I saw opportunity. Known ominously as the Hammer of the Scots, Edward posed as an arbitrator, but he had no intention of letting Scotland remain independent. Supporting puppet kings and demanding control, he pushed Scotland into submission, stripping away its sovereignty piece by piece. The flame of rebellion first blazed brightly in 1297, led by one William Wallace. His defiant stand at the Battle of Stirling Bridge briefly stunned England and lit hope in the hearts of Scots. But Wallace's triumph was short-lived. His capture and brutal execution by the English were intended to snuff out the rebellion. Yet, like embers glowing faintly in a dying fire, his spirit lived on, inspiring others. Robert the Bruce, the grandson of one of the earlier claimants to the throne. Bruce wasn't always a hero to all Scots. His early years were marked by political rivalry and bloody internal clashes, including the killing of a rival in a church, an act that led to his excommunication and exile. Yet, through sheer resilience, cunning, and battlefield prowess, Bruce slowly rebuilt his power. By 1306, he had seized the crown of Scotland, even while hunted by the English and scorned by the church. Bruce had absorbed important lessons from those years of guerrilla warfare, ambushes, raids, scorched earth tactics. He avoided costly pitched battles where his smaller force could be overwhelmed. He knew every inch of Scottish land, and he used it to frustrate and wear down the English. By the time 1314 rolled around, Bruce faced an urgent crisis. Stirling Castle, a key strategic stronghold, was under siege by his brother Edward Bruce. The castle's garrison promised to surrender unless the English arrived with relief by midsummer. Edward II, eager to crush Bruce once and for all, gathered an enormous army, knights, archers, and infantry, far outnumbering Bruce's hardened men. But Edward's march northward was no simple military campaign. It was a long, slow advance through hostile terrain, with supply carts groaning under their weight and local villages bracing for the destructive passage of an invading force. The Scots had prepared well, burning crops and stripping supplies in a ruthless scorched earth strategy designed to starve the enemy before battle even began. And so, as Edward's army pushed deeper into Scotland, they stumbled unknowingly into a masterful trap laid by Robert the Bruce. He had studied the ground near the Bannockburn carefully. The narrow fields hemmed by marshes and woods would negate the advantage of the English cavalry charges, Edward's biggest weapon. At the center of Bruce's plan stood the Schiltron, tight, disciplined formations of foot soldiers armed with long spears, standing shoulder to shoulder like a living wall of thorns. These were not disorganized peasants, but seasoned warriors shaped by years of relentless struggle. You can almost hear the clatter of their spear tips, shining in the sunlight like the spines of a giant hedgehog daring horse and rider alike to come closer. So now the question isn't just why or how Bruce chose to fight. It's how the Scots' resolve would stand in the face of overwhelming odds. Would they crumble? Or could they turn the tide of history with every spear thrust and shield bash? This is where the legend of Bannockburn truly begins. The sun dipped low on the horizon on June 22, 1314, as the armies reached the fighting ground. Both sides knew the coming confrontation would decide everything: Stirling Castle's future, Scotland's fate, and the course of an entire kingdom's history. That evening, darkness fell, but the tension didn't. Campfires flickered as Bruce moved among his men, not as a detached king, but as a fellow soldier. He offered quiet words of reassurance and prayers. No words were wasted on fear, only steely determination. Meanwhile, across the burn, the vast English camp sparkled under the torchlight. Knights laughed loudly, confident that their superior numbers and cavalry would crush the Scots. But beneath the bravado, some among the English ranks whispered warnings. They knew what lay before them wasn't just another raid, it was a test of wills. Then came a moment that has echoed through history. A lone English knight, Sir Henry de Bohun, spotted Robert the Bruce riding near the Scottish front lines. Seeing his apparent vulnerability, Bohun charged, lance lowered, intent on ending the war in a single blow. But Bruce, quick and deadly, sidestepped and struck with his battle axe, splitting Bohun's skull. The silence shattered into a roar of triumph from the Scots, a sign that their leader was no easy prey. When dawn broke on June 23rd, the air buzzed with anticipation. The English knights rode forward, horse hooves pounding and lances ready. But the Schiltren stood firm, a wall of spears that met the charging cavalry like an immovable force. Horses screamed, men fell, and the English momentum faltered. On that narrow, marshy battlefield, the wary English soldiers found themselves trapped between the Burn and the unyielding Scots. Horses floundered in the mud, knights were skewered by spears, and the English attack dissolved into chaos. As the first day ended, the Scots had survived. More than that, they had held. Their courage and discipline not only shocked their enemies, but inspired their own hearts. The fight was not over, but the impossible was now possible. As the sun rose on June 24th, 1314, the air hung thick with a buzzing tension. Two armies faced each other once more, the dawn light glittering off helmets and spears, casting long shadows onto the bloodied earth beneath. Edward II's massive force was uneasy. Confidence had given way to frustration. Across the Bannockburn, the smaller Scottish army waited in solemn silence, their spear points catching the morning sun like a shimmering forest, ready to defend every inch of their homeland. Have you ever been in a moment where everything feels balanced on a razor's edge, as if the slightest breath could tip the world one way or the other? That was Bannockburn on that morning, a place where the future of Scotland and England would irreversibly change, where men prepared to carve their names into history with steel and blood. Before the battle erupted, Robert the Bruce did something that few battlefield commanders dared. He gathered his men together and led them in prayer. Wimps begging for mercy? Far from it. The Scots knelt together on the damp grass, their spears thrust upright around them, creating a protective ring of steel. Simple clerics moved quietly through the ranks, murmuring blessings, laying hands on swords and shoulders alike, raising their voices in solemn hymns. The English lines watched with a mix of curiosity and derision. They kneeled to beg for mercy, some scoffed, confident in their numerical superiority. But for the Scots, this was a sacred moment of focus, a communal call for courage and resolve, binding the men together as brothers in arms. When the hymns ended, the Scottish lines rose as one. The Schiltrens, those formidable shield and spear formations, drew tighter, their resolve unshaken. The long pikes fronting their ranks caught the early sun, each spear like a quill on a gigantic hedgehog, creating an impenetrable barrier to horse and man alike. It was a stunning display of discipline. These were not mere peasants thrown together, but hardened veterans forged by years of constant warfare. Imagine now the English host. Edward II was a man under immense pressure. His father's untimely death had left him with a legacy to uphold and a rebellious kingdom to tame. Though vast in numbers, his generals urged caution. The very ground ahead was a formidable foe, marshy, narrow, broken by that winding stream. Their heavy cavalry, trained for open fields and sweeping charges, would find little room to maneuver. But Edward's temper and need for decisive victory seized him. He gave the order for a full advance, the earth trembling under the thunderous march of thousands. The first wave swelled forward like a living storm, banners snapping, hooves beating a war rhythm across the fields. You can hear the muffled cries, the clash of steel, the heavy breathing of men preparing to dash headlong into danger. Across that gauntlet, the Scottish Schiltrens advanced steadily, step by step. They didn't wait to be crushed. Instead, they pressed forward. The clash was brutal and close. Horses screamed and reared, charging into walls of sharpened steel, knights thrown to the mire, screaming, drowning in a sea of spears. Can you picture it? The ground shaking with the force of horses pounding in, only to meet an immovable forest of spears and shields. Knights who once thought themselves invincible crashed to the earth, their polished armor no protection against the deadly pikes. Among the English men-at-arms, panic began to smother hope. The battlefield constraints, the marshy soil, narrow approach, and tight fighting lines broke their pattern of warfare. The English longbowmen, feared throughout Europe for their devastating volleys, found themselves trapped by their own cavalry. Crowded and pressed from all sides, their arrows could not find clear targets, their lethal potential wasted in the chaos. Step by step, the Scots pushed onward, spear edge meeting shield, creating a grinding, relentless pressure. The English formations buckled under the strain. The narrow ground left little room to regroup or reinforce. Fear flickered through ranks that had been confident only hours before. Then came the turning point of the battle, a sudden, surprising charge from the Scottish camp followers. What were these men doing? Cooks and grooms with makeshift weapons and broken bits of gear. To the beleaguered English, the sight resembled fresh reinforcements heading into the fray. That spark set off a wildfire of panic. Knights broke ranks, shoving and trampling their own foot soldiers in desperate attempts to escape the pressure. The Bannockburn, that ominous stream, became a deadly trap as thousands tried to flee across treacherous, narrow fords. Horses slipped and drowned, men scrambled and fell under the weight of armor and chaos. Edward II himself fled in fear, barely escaping capture. His route led him towards Stirling Castle, only to face the excruciating humiliation of being refused entry. The governor, aware the castle's fall was imminent to Bruce's forces, closed the gates on his own king. The once mighty English army shattered, scattered, and broken. Tens of thousands lay dead or captured. The battlefield after the fight was a grim tapestry of blood, broken weapons, fallen banners, and the moans of the wounded. For the Scots, the cost was grave, but victory was theirs. But Bannockburn was not just a textbook military triumph. It was a profound statement of identity and sovereignty. Robert the Bruce stood victorious not only as a king, but as a symbol of the unyielding Scottish spirit. The battle was a testament that hearts and minds, guided by strategy and unity, could overcome brute strength. Imagine the journey of the captured English knights and common soldiers, taken prisoner, some later ransomed, bringing riches into Scotland. The spoils went beyond gold and horses. Bannockburn enriched a nation's hope and pride. In England, the effects of the defeat were immediate and painful. Edward II returned in disgrace, his reputation shattered, mocked as the king who fled from the Scots. His barons' discontent grew, fueling unrest that would shake the very foundations of his rule. For Scotland, the victory at Bannockburn validated years of bloody struggle. Robert the Bruce's contested crown was now embraced, his legitimacy undeniable. The Schiltren, those walls of spears wielded by common infantry, had shattered the myth of the invincible knightly charge, heralding a new era in medieval warfare. What had started as a desperate fight for survival had become a story of triumph that inspired unity. Scots who had once wavered between allegiance to England or Bruce now rallied unequivocally behind their king. Yet the wars of Scottish independence were far from over. Edward II refused to accept defeat fully, and the resources of England meant skirmishes, raids, and sieges would continue for years. But Bannockburn had changed the game irreversibly. England could no longer dismiss Scotland as a rebellious province to be crushed at will. Scotland had bloodied its would-be conqueror and earned its place as a determined, defiant nation. Beyond the battlefield, the story of Bannockburn spread across Europe. Tales of a smaller, stubborn nation beating a mighty empire resonated widely. Diplomats in France and the papal courts began to see Scotland not as an upstart rebellion, but as a legitimate kingdom worthy of recognition. In the years that followed, Bannockburn became legend, its memory carried in songs, stories, and the very identity of Scotland itself. Robert the Bruce grew beyond a warrior king to a symbol, a man embodying the soul of his people. Tales of his courage and defiance were passed down by bards and storytellers, his shadow lingering over sacred turning points in Scottish history. Even the land bore the memory. The fields, burns, and moors where blood had soaked deep became hallowed ground in the Scottish imagination, a symbol of freedom defended by ordinary men's extraordinary courage. Centuries later, poets like Robert Burns would immortalize Bannockburn in stirring anthems, calling on the spirit of Bruce to inspire future generations. The battle remains a touchstone of hope and courage, a reminder that the fiercest battle is often fought not just with weapons, but with the unbreakable will to be free. For Scotland, Bannockburn was the day a small nation finally stood tall. But what happened after the clash? How did Bannockburn transform from a single battle into a lasting symbol of Scottish independence and influence military strategy for generations? And how did Robert the Bruce's life and legacy evolve after such a monumental moment? To start, Bannockburn dealt a devastating blow to English military prestige. Thousands of knights and seasoned warriors, many from England's most noble houses, had been killed or taken prisoner. Entire chivalric households were wiped out in the chaos. The captured knights would later be ransomed, bringing a wave of wealth into Scotland, but draining England's elite. For Edward II, the defeat was personally shattering. He fled the battlefield in shame, his reputation trailing in tatters. Unlike his father Edward I, known as the Hammer of the Scots for his relentless campaigns, Edward II was mocked as the king who fled. His barons' dissatisfaction grew, contributing to internal rebellion and political instability in England. Over the following years, Robert the Bruce weathered continued conflict but pressed his advantage. Stirling Castle, the prize that had brought Edward II north, soon surrendered to the Scots. The road south into England was left open, and Scotland's independence, though still contested, was now a reality few could deny. Bannockburn's legacy became enshrined in culture and memory. Stories of the battle, of the fierce determination and courage of common men and their warrior king, spread throughout every village and town. Robert the Bruce's figure grew larger than life, celebrated in bardic songs and chronicles alike. The fields and woods of Bannockburn became sacred ground in Scottish imagination, a symbol of blood and steel, sacrifice and hope. Whenever Scotland's sovereignty or identity was threatened in later centuries, the memory of Bannockburn was invoked as a rallying cry, reminding Scots of their fierce independence. Poets centuries later, like Robert Burns, immortalized the victory. Burns's epic poem Scots Wha Hae, written as a speech from Bruce to his men on the eve of battle, breathed life into the spirit of Bannockburn, inspiring generations to stand for freedom against oppression. Today, Bannockburn is remembered not just as a battle, but as a defining moment in Scottish history and medieval warfare, a testament to the power of leadership, terrain, and an unwavering desire for freedom. So, when you think of Bannockburn, imagine not just the clash of steel and thunder of hooves, but a small nation's indomitable spirit rising to carve a place for itself in history, a story that continues to inspire across the centuries and borders. If you enjoyed this dive into the unforgiving world of Bannockburn, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell, because next time we'll be stepping into another world of history that will blow your mind.